What's up, guys? On this episode of On the Set, I'm checking out the remake of Roadhouse starring Jake Gyllenhaal and Conor McGregor. Let's get into it. The movie starts off with a guy named Carter, played by Post Malone, who's fighting a guy in an underground fighting league of some kind. He's been winning back-to-back fights, but all of a sudden, Dalton, a former UFC fighter, steps in to fight him, and Carter freaks out and refuses. Afterward, Dalton meets a girl named Frankie who wants him to come be the head bouncer at her roadhouse in the Florida Keys. At first, he declines and tries to kill himself by parking his car on train tracks. Just then, some kind of fight broadcast comes across the radio, and it's hinted at that he's unhappy about something that happened in his past. Dalton suddenly changes his mind, and at the last second, narrowly escapes getting smashed by the train. He then decides to take the job. So, Dalton heads down to the Florida Keys and meets some of the people working at the bar. Later that night, a bunch of drunk fights break out. This one guy, Del, shows up with his crew of biker assholes, and they cause a ruckus. Dalton takes them outside and kicks their ass single-handedly. But, feeling pretty bad for it, he then drives them all to the hospital to get patched up, and he meets Ellie, a doctor who he seems to hit it off with. A bit later on, we see a flashback of Dalton and the UFC. But we don't see why he stopped fighting. Then, Dalton befriends a girl named Charlie, who helps her dad run a bookstore in town. One day, as Dalton comes by to use their computer, she chases off some thugs with a bat. So clearly, she's not afraid of the locals. Meanwhile, the thugs that Dalton beat up go to report what happened to their boss, a guy named Ben, who's getting a close shave on a yacht in rocky water. I mean, who does that? Who gets shaved with a straight razor on a boat? Anyway, apparently, Ben wants to tear down the roadhouse. After a quick montage of Dalton training some younger guys to be bouncers, Del and the others show back up, but they end up leaving. The next day, Dalton runs into Ellie yet again, and she warns him about the thugs he dealt with, saying that they're all dangerous. After work that night, as he's walking down the road, Dalton almost gets run down by Del and the others who are driving by in a car. When he makes it back to the houseboat that he's staying in, Del is waiting for him with a shotgun. They have a brief fight, and Del falls into the water, where he's immediately eaten by an alligator. Damn, what a way to go out. But, fuck 'em. Then, more of Ben's cronies show up to kidnap Dalton, but Dalton just breaks one of the guy's hands and walks away. Back on Ben's yacht, he gets a call from his dad, who's apparently in prison, but Ben just gets frustrated and throws his phone into the water. It looked like at one point, his dad had plans to build some sort of huge resort right where the roadhouse is standing, but he's in jail now. So his son Ben is continuing what he started. All of a sudden, we get introduced to Knox, who's walking around naked for whatever reason. He gets a call from Ben's dad, who says they have a problem in Florida. I guess Ben isn't getting the job done, so his dad had to call in the big gun. As Knox shows up to take over Ben's operation, Dalton gets taken in for questioning. The sheriff turns out to be real shady and wants Dalton to leave town. Maybe he's working for Ben's dad. The deputies pull Dalton out of the car and kick his ass. But all of a sudden, Ellie shows up and slaps the shit out of the sheriff. As it turns out, that's her dad. Ellie explains that her father used to work for Gerald Brandt, who's Ben's father, and that Gerald basically used to run the town they're in. That night at the roadhouse, Ben confronts Dalton. Ben shows him a clip of the UFC fight where he beats a guy after winning and just asks him why he did it. Just then, Knox walks in and starts tearing up the place, and he takes out two other bouncers. This causes a bunch of random patrons to start fighting, and he just takes them all out. As a huge fight breaks out, Knox calls out Dalton, and they just start beating the shit out of each other. It's pretty wild. After the fight, Dalton decides to leave town. On his way out, he comes across Charlie's bookstore, which has been burnt to the ground. Seeing this, Dalton changes his mind and goes back to Brandt's house to confront them. The guy who burnt the store down is by the pool, and Dalton crushes his throat with one punch, and the guy falls into the pool and drowns. After that, we get another flashback of the fight that Ben talked about. It looks like Dalton severely hurt his opponent during a fight because he lost his temper. I'm guessing that's why he walked away from the UFC, because he couldn't control his temper. After a while, the sheriff finds Dalton and says that Ben kidnapped Ellie. Oh, so now you want his help. Anyway, Dalton's supposed to bring a suitcase full of money that one of the deputies had to a meeting on Ben's yacht in exchange for Ellie. Once he gets there, instead of negotiating, Dalton just blows the yacht up. Then it gets even crazier. After Dalton saves Ellie, Knox shows up and steals her back. As Ben takes a speedboat towards the roadhouse, Dalton jumps on it and they start fighting. The speedboat comes crashing to shore, sending Ben like 20 feet in the air, and he lands on the roof. When they finally make it inside, Knox comes flying through the building in a truck like a true asshole. Dalton and Knox have one last epic fight, ending with Knox stabbing Dalton. Ben comes over and starts screaming at Knox, and Knox just breaks his neck. All of a sudden, Dalton's adrenaline kicks in, and he jumps up and stabs the shit out of Knox repeatedly until he dies. Afterward, the sheriff comes walking in and tells Dalton just to leave town to avoid any involvement, as a payback for saving his daughter. Sometime later, Frankie and some others start to repair the roadhouse. Dalton leaves Charlie and her father the suitcase of money that he had before he leaves town. The end. Well, this one was just insane. Those fight scenes were pretty wild. Jake Gyllenhaal did awesome in this one. And Connor, well, he was alright. Anyway, despite what some people have been saying, this is a great remake. It just sucks that Dalton didn't stay in town, so I guess we're not getting a sequel. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I think you should head on over to Amazon Prime to check it out. Alright, see you later.